Welcome to episode 43 of Inside Politics, for teens, by teens, where I explore the politics and issues impacting our generation. I'm your host, Christina Li, and today I've invited Justine Lore, Head of Client and Influencer Engagement at Politico. Justine, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, of course. So let's jump right in. So could you define your role as head of client and influencer engagement at Politico and also give a brief overview of the work that you do?
Sure. So I work on what we call our audience solutions team, which is essentially our ad sales team at Politico on the revenue side of the business. So apart from the newsroom, we have a definite firewall between the business side and the editorial side, which is really an important part of our business. And my job is to work with our executive team, namely our CEO and editors-in-chief, and help facilitate meetings and getting them involved in some of our strategic partnerships. So I know you had Brad Bosserman, who heads up our corporate partnerships on your show a couple of weeks ago. And he talked a little bit about how his team works with these partners to find creative ways for them to communicate with our influential audience. My job is to assist that team in just that by helping to engage our strategic partners at that executive level, at that C-suite level. So making sure that we have relationships throughout the entire organization and leveraging the power of our C-suite team when it's necessary to help, get something moving or get answers that we need from our clients. So a lot of what I am charged with is helping to identify relationships that we want to grow and or help facilitate and get those meetings so that we can continue to, move towards our revenue goals. And on the other end of what I do is that influencer engagement. So Politico's unique value proposition is that our audience is made up of the most powerful people in these big power centers. So co-centric circles of power, people who need essential, reliable information, nonpartisan, and really rely on Politico to be able to do their jobs. Those are the people that we really want to help cultivate relationships with and continue to have them engaged with the Politico brand as, they get to know us and as we're working with them. And very often those people end up being our sources for our editorial room. There are people who end up being speakers at events like the AI Summit, which is going on today virtually for Politico. And just a really important part of our ecosystem to make sure that we're caring and feeding for all of our influential people and the VIPs in our world.
Understood. So could you talk a little bit more about that dynamic that you talk about with the ecosystem between between Politico and your clients?
Yeah. So again, our audience, super influential people. They are not only the people on the Hill, at the White House, making our laws, making decisions, but they're also industry leaders, the heads of associations, people who are pounding the pavement, in a non-COVID world on the Hill, lobbying, and really the people kind of moving and shaking, not only in DC, but in other power centers like Brussels, where we have our Politico EU office, and then around the states, for example, Sacramento, we have a large office there because California is such an important player in kind of the sphere of influence in terms of what politics and policy that we're covering. So it's really important for us to not only understand what those clients and readers are looking for from Politico in terms of content, but also making sure that we're always coming up with interesting solutions to whatever communication questions they have or problems that they have that we can help solve in terms of helping to relay that information in interesting ways to that larger audience.
Understood. And I guess since Politico is meant for, these like VIP people, but also for, the general public to consume, how do you balance those two interests and how do you accommodate both of them?
So I don't actually see them as diverging from each other. I think, people who read Politico are not only those decision makers that I talked about, not only the people who literally need this kind of coverage and insight into what's going on in the world of politics and policy to be able to do their jobs. But you also have engaged young people like yourself who want to understand what's happening in politics, want to understand in a nonpartisan way, exactly what is going on with this bill that's moving through the House, or, cutting through all of the noise of the left and the right, what are the actual facts and how can I best understand what's happening so that then you can make your own decision about where you may fall on either side of the aisle or independently from that. So it really runs the gamut. Only about 5% of our audience, I think, is actually from the DC area. So we do have this large national footprint, which is so important because obviously, things aren't just happening in DC, they're happening all over the country. So it's been interesting to kind of uncover and understand how those concentric circles of power, not only here in DC, but also around the country, loop together and form our powerful audience.
Understood. And I guess how has the dynamic changed, I guess like throughout the years, given maybe the rise in technology and how maybe, I guess like news has changed?
So I'll actually use this year as an example, this weird year that we're all living in. So one of the mandates I have is to help connect our C-suite with our partners. And before March, a lot of that was happening in person. It was happening at big moments, big conferences like the World Economic Forum, South by Southwest, Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas in January, all of these big kind of convergent points where people are getting together and sharing ideas and doing a lot of high-level networking. Obviously, that's not as possible these days, but thank goodness that the advent of Zoom and the ability for us to find other ways to connect exists now. Otherwise, I would probably, be having a lot of a harder time than I am. But I've actually found that it's almost easier to connect with people in this medium. You're losing some of the benefits, obviously, of being in person. I can't read your energy as well through a screen as I could, in person, to understand how your, body language or how your feedback, your nonverbal feedback is being delivered. But people are more accessible because people aren't, hopping on a plane 7 days a week and traveling for business. So, you've got a little bit more time to be accessible and take the meetings that you may not have been able to take in the past. And our team has found it, to be advantageous in a way that we're actually having really high level, valuable conversations through this medium that in some ways is almost making up for the lack of being able to be in a room with people. So, there's pros and cons. But the advent of technology, at least in my role at Politico, in terms of helping to connect with influentials, has definitely been interesting to see the evolution of it over the last 7 or 8 months, however long it's been. It feels like years.
Yeah. And I guess like given that so much of your role is connecting with people, how does that influence, I guess, your perception of politics?
It's interesting. I grew up in this area, so I grew up in DC. So I think if you grow up in the DC metro area, you kind of have an affinity you're more likely to have an affinity for politics, either that or it's the complete opposite and you want nothing to do with it. So I don't know, it's been interesting to kind of see the world that was usually so based upon people getting together and networking and cocktail hours and going to the Hill and lobbying and literally getting in front of people to get their attention. And, for Politico, converging these powerful groups of influential people for some of our many live events or for big moments like White House Correspondents' Weekend. It's been interesting to see, like I said, the pivot to figuring out how to do that in a meaningful way in a virtual setting. So what will be really interesting is if there is a potential administration change, if Biden wins the election or if Trump wins the election and brings in, new people to his cabinet, regardless of who wins the presidential election, there's bound to always be turnover in Congress with new members and senators coming in. And typically when you have a transition year like that, it's really important to be able to not only, introduce new members to the Politico brand and make sure that they understand kind of what we do and who we are. For our editorial team, meeting those people, meeting those sources, beginning to grow those relationships. For lobbyists, meeting all of the new players and being able to, get in front of them and have that FaceTime. It'll be very interesting to see how this town and how DC in general is able to adapt to a world that may not be as accessible as it had been in the past. So how do new members of Congress, for example, connect with each other in a way that may not include many social gatherings as they had in the past? Or how in my role, one of the things I have to think about, and one of the things we work with a lot of our partners on, is helping brands get their name out to clients, right? So you have a corporation that may want to do a little bit of reputation work or a little storytelling about the good that they're doing in the world, whether that's, ESG initiatives that they have going on, or human interest stories. How are you going to be able to start communicating all of the good that you're doing without being able to kind of get in front of people physically? And that's where I think we can be a really powerful partner. And a lot of the conversations we've been having are about how, going into 2021, are we going to help position our strategic partners in terms of being able to tell their stories and have that platform, because Politico, as I mentioned, does have such a powerful readership. So I think the next couple of months will be really interesting to see how the city and how these concentric circles are able to navigate kind of brand new terrain. Even though it already has been 8 months of this, we're still finding firsts in our COVID lives. So
yeah, definitely. And I guess based on the fact that I guess so much of your work is in developing these relationships, is that speaking to the importance of, I guess, people and relationships and networking driving, I guess, the political sphere?
I mean, in my experience, all business, all politics is all about relationships, right? So if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're saying, how is the new kind of world order of Zoom meetings and not being able to kind of just go grab a cocktail with somebody affecting people's ability to govern, or to?
So it's more of a general question, because I guess even before we the COVID world, it's everything, all of your work, or a lot of your work, is focused on developing these partnerships and maintaining these relationships with people. And I guess, is this also representative of the political world and how those relationships are so instrumental to the workings of the political sphere?
I mean, I'm not a politician, have never been a politician, but I would imagine, very similar challenges in that, DC has always been a town about relationships and building coalitions and understanding each other on a human level and being able to find ways to hopefully work together. And in a very polarized world that we find ourselves in now more than ever, an added layer of separation, physical separation, can only be making that harder and harder and harder. So, from my perspective in my job, it's definitely an added layer, but I would imagine for politicians especially, and especially going into an election and potential transitions coming up at the end of this year and the beginning of next, I imagine it will be a brand new landscape for a lot of them.
Definitely. And I guess just what does serving in this role mean to you personally?
I love the organization. I just had my 1-year anniversary. So in terms of political years, I'm still considered a little bit of a newbie, but the organization has really, I believe, been able to be flexible enough and listening to their employees and really navigated all of this as best as they possibly could, given these unique circumstances. On a larger level, I was so excited to come work for Politico because I think that there's such a need for nonpartisan journalism right now. And I think it's harder and harder to find an organization with a kind of commitment to that nonpartisan view. There's a narrow lane that we occupy, and it's a really valuable lane, not only because, you know, there's opportunity there in terms of the partnerships that we have, but because it's good for the country, for there to be kind of neutral ground where people can literally just cut through all of the noise and understand what's going on so that they can come to their own conclusions without kind of having all the talking heads in their ears. And I've been continuously inspired and really energized by the level of commitment throughout the entire organization to that mission. So it's really a great place to be, because I feel like I'm an active participant in trying to make the world a little bit better.
Mhm.
And you know, having a safe place for rational conversation that's really taking into account all perspectives. So that's been really great in a very otherwise challenging year, I think.
Definitely. And I guess like as we see Generation Z, as we like look to the future and Generation Z starts, I guess, like inheriting some of these some of these positions and occupations, how do you see this commitment? I guess like how do you see like the ways in which I guess like the new generations go about preserving this commitment to maybe like change and develop?
I think Gen Z is already taking a leadership role in a lot of this. I mean, I have been over the last couple of months so inspired by seeing how people in your generation and even younger in some cases are really taking on the mantle of causes that they believe in, wanting to cut through kind of, you know, all the bull that older generations, you know, myself included, have kind of muddied up the waters with. I mean, the conversations I've had with people your age and younger are so inspiring, because when I think back to when I was that age, I was nowhere near as engaged, nowhere near as educated about what's going on. And I think there's already such a leg up that Gen Z has, that not only technologically, but just spiritually in a way, that by the time you guys are in my positions, sky's the limit. I mean, honestly, you think out of a box. And I think that's something that a lot of people in my generation and generations above could really take as a lesson in terms of how to not limit ourselves and limit our thinking to those social constructs that we've been kind of taught from birth. So I have so much inspiration from everything that the younger generations have been doing. And frankly, you know, the ability to adapt and take off with technology is not only incredible, but borderline frightening for somebody who was, you know, raised in the 80s and thought a Game Boy was the height of, you know, technological prowess at the time. So I've been really inspired. I think it's great. And, you know, our company is really young too. We have a lot of millennial and Gen Z employees, and internally, the leadership that they've taken in terms of making sure that we're having internal conversations about diversity and having internal conversations about the importance of our mission statement to, you know, protect that nonpartisan journalism has been incredible. And I think the organization's only getting better because of those voices standing out and standing up.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I think that we can strive to keep fostering that, not even just in Politico, but also in the world.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you so much, Justine, for joining me here today. I really appreciate your insights. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see everybody next time on Inside Politics. Hi everyone, this is Christina. Thank you so much for watching Inside Politics, and please feel free to check out the rest of the interviews on my channel. See you next time!